My name is Heather Miller, and I am the Deputy Administrator at the Greenville Zoo, and Jeff Bullock is with me tonight, and he is the Administrator of the zoo. And we are kicking off a lecture series called Committed to Conservation. It's the first one that we've done at the zoo, and we thank Furman for letting us have it here and for approving it for CLP credit for you guys. So why are we doing this? Let me see if I can get it to hit next without doing that. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that conservation is a key part of the mission. The mission of the Greenville Zoo is to serve our community by promoting an appreciation of nature and wildlife while providing a unique opportunity to recreate and participate in innovative programs for education and conservation. We hope to serve as a model for conservation and conduct ongoing research to enhance the world that we live in. The Greenville Zoo is dedicated to the animals in our care and a continued preservation of their natural habitats. It's a long mission statement, but we mean it, and it seems to incorporate everything that we stand for. So second, I've been able to spend some time with Dr. Travis Perry and some of the students that are here as well, working with the Furman Cougar Project. And we talked about doing a lecture series and something that could be approved for CLP credit for the students. Third, I was lucky enough to attend a conservation lecture or conservation conference this past summer for zoos and aquariums, and there was a lot of talk about getting the word out for different field conservation projects. So I hope that this lecture series works to get the word out in the upstate about some excellent projects that could use your support. There we go. So in the next few weeks, we will have another lecture that'll be on February 25th, and Jeff Holmes from Partners for Amphibian and Reptile Conservation will be coming out to talk about habitat conservation right here in the region. And then in March, Dr. Perry, who a lot of you know, will be talking about the puma ecology and management. And in April, Dr. Mary Galdikas, I think that's how you say her last name, she'll be out here from the Orangutan Foundation talking about the struggles that orangutans face in Borneo and Sumatra. And in May, we'll hear Jonathan Slott from the Amur Leopard and Tiger Alliance come out and talk about conservation in the Far East. So we have a lot of great talks in store, and hopefully you guys can make it out for the rest of them as well. But tonight I'd like to give you a little context and a little background on the role of zoos from a conservation perspective, especially in today's environmentally conscious society. So 50 years ago, zoos existed with the primary purpose of displaying animals, especially exotic animals that would not normally be accessible to your average citizen. Zoos were built as menageries, and they often displayed just one or two individual animals and tried to display a lot of different exotic species. There was a distinct air of excitement around the animal displays, and sometimes the more dangerous, the better. Zoos often focused on the sensational and the wondrous. And I really like this guy who's training the two black bears because he's doing it with his cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and he apparently is very coordinated. You probably wouldn't see this today in US zoos, maybe some in Europe, but probably not here. But today we are not all that different. So we still basically pride ourselves on being a location where you can see exotic animals without having to get on an airplane. You may still see some amazing contact of zookeepers and staff with animals, just like this zookeeper who is feeding the baby polar bear cub his diet. We also still have animal ambassadors, like this kinkajou that I'm holding, and like Mandy and some of the zoo staff have in the back. We have some animal ambassadors. However, there has been a conscious and deliberate shift in the philosophy of zoos that changes the top priority from being that of display to being that of conservation and education. We may still have contact with the animals in our care, but for the most part, any contact that we have has a purpose. And that may be for training, or it could be a medical purpose, as shown in this photograph, where a keeper is weighing the penguins in her care. So why has there been this shift? The shift occurred for many for many zoos in the 80s and 90s for several different reasons. One was the population boom that was occurring during this time and is depicted on the graph in the slide. Another reason was the advancement of science. We knew which species of animals we have, we knew their numbers, and we knew that their numbers were declining. And sometimes we knew why, and we knew that often we were the cause and we needed to do something about it. So zoos are uniquely positioned to educate the public not only about exotic animals, but also about native animals, about sustainability, and about the effect that the average zoo goer has on their surroundings. This slide depicts a great program at Cleveland Metro Park Zoo where their staff ride bicycles from area to area in order to decrease energy use at the zoo. In 2010, the Greenville Zoo participated in a survey of water and energy use that was initiated by the city of Greenville. And as you can see from the graphs looking from 2010 to 2013, there is a distinct decrease in both water consumption and energy consumption at the zoo. The Greenville Zoo was also voted one of the coolest places to charge your car. And this is also proof of the unique position that zoos have to educate and excite the public about sustainability and conservation. And if we're talking about sustainability, sorry, I'm trying to stay away from the microphone, we have to mention compost. Did you know that the average elephant produces over 200 pounds of manure every day? And we have 2 elephants at the Greenville Zoo, so we do deal with a lot of manure. And zoos, again, are in a unique position to educate the public about composting. A lot of zoos have botanical garden components, and so they'll actually sell their compost. You see the Holidew up at the top right of the slide, and I believe that one is from Woodland Park Zoo. So we also participate in a small program. The gentleman with the bicycle, they take some of our manure, they turn it into compost, and they use it in community gardens. Another way that zoos practice sustainability is through species survival plans. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeff so that he can discuss what these are, how they work, and how they contribute to sustainability.
Thank you, Heather. First, thank you all for being here tonight. I'm not going to show a lot of charts and graphs, but one thing we need to understand is how everything works. Talked a lot about sustainability in different areas. Animal sustainability is critical to zoos and zoos' futures. What you see up here is the Greenville Zoo. We're accredited by the AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We're one of 225 institutions in North America that are currently accredited. Within the AZA is the group, the Conservation and Science Department, and beneath that, the Wildlife Conservation Management Committee. This committee oversees basically all the animals that are in captivity in zoos around the country. Within that group, they've broken down the animals into smaller groups by taxon. So we've got taxon advisory groups, which we call tags. You have a felid tag, bear tag, because there's so many different kind of primates. You have an old world monkey tag, a new world monkey tag. And so the tags really have the ability to oversee a large group of animals. Each tag has a steering committee that's elected by its peers. It's all zoo professionals that serve on these committees. Within these tags, we have the Species Survival Program, which is a unique program where it narrows down to one species, and you've got a coordinator, a vice coordinator, that will oversee kind of the management of those animals, along with the management committee. And what they do, they take the information from a stud bookkeeper, and anyone that's familiar with horses, cattle, or any other type of registered animal, every zoo or every animal in the zoos across North America are registered in a stud book. So you can pluck an animal out of our zoo, go through the stud book, trace it back to its original ancestors that were pulled out of the wild. Some of these stud books go back to the 1800s with all the historical data. So it's really an amazing process. What the SSP does, they take these stud books, they can determine the genetic variability of the population, and that's how they make recommendations of what animals should be bred with whom. The Greenville Zoo currently has 26 separate species that belong within a species survival program, and we work with each in a variety of ways. Species survival programs really started in 1982 when one of the biologists at the Minnesota Zoo, who was focusing on tiger conservation, developed the idea of a species survival program for tigers. Ron Tilson started the program as a way to not only do a better job at breeding tigers, but also do a smarter job at breeding tigers. They developed the stud books that would really trace the tiger's ancestry, be able to take it back so you knew who was breeding with whom. During this same time period, in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of zoos were breeding animals. People loved coming out to the zoo, see baby animals, and tigers were no different. And it was nice, except for the one thing, there's only so many spaces in zoos for animals. What happened in the 80s, you saw on Heather's chart with that big boom of reproduction, is there was nowhere left in zoos for a lot of these animals to go. And a lot of the animals at that time ended up in the private sector, hobbyists, and a lot of those are still there today. You read a lot about different incidents where people have tigers in their backyard or other animals that they're keeping. That was a big problem. They recognized it back in the early 80s, and through the SSPs, we're able to start managing the breeding, not only to breed, but realizing it's just important sometimes not to breed. So now the SSPs are focused more on how many spaces are available and what to do with those spaces. Are those spaces going to be for tigers, or are they going to be for lions? We need a certain amount of spaces for each animal. But also, we want to make sure when we do reproduce or we do pair animals, that they're paired with an animal that they're as different from genetically as possible, so that we can look toward the future. Talked a little bit about the hobbyists getting tigers, pet tigers. Dangerous game. Siegfried and Roy found that out the hard way. The white tigers, another reason we focus on the SSP. People love going to the zoo and see white tigers. I don't know, has anybody seen white tigers at a zoo out here? Beautiful animals. The problem is from a genetic standpoint, they are so inbred that the AZA and the Species Survival Program really try to push us away from those kind of animals so we can utilize those spaces for more valuable genetic animals. The origin of the white tigers actually only dates back to 1951 when a Maharaja Rewa over in India found an orphan cub. He took it back to his house. He ended up breeding it with a regular tiger once it was old enough. That pair produced 3 litters, and later on he reproduced the young male that he found with one of its offspring and produced the first litter of white tiger cubs. Every white tiger cub you see, North America, Europe, India, are all related back to that one tiger. So when you talk about a family tree, it just started out here and it just goes straight up. Everything's related. So from a genetic standpoint, they're really not valuable animals to the population. For the Greenville Zoo, we keep animals for a lot of different reasons. These are all SSP animals. If you've come out and seen our Amur leopards, we had 3 of them a year ago. These are 3 young females that we got from the Potawatomi Zoo in South Bend, Indiana. They did have a breeding recommendation. They bred them. They weren't expecting triplets. They didn't have room for triplets. So the SSP asked us if we could take them, raise them up. We raised the 3 up. One of the 3 was transferred to a zoo in Minot, North Dakota earlier this fall to be paired with a male. Eventually we'll have another female that'll be sent somewhere paired with another unrelated male, and hopefully we'll get a male into the Greenville area so that we can start reproducing our own Amur leopards. We have a lot of bachelor groups, the black and white rough lemurs that you see up there. That's the father and 3 sons that we were asked to hold. They all came from Lufkin, Texas, and are part of the SSP, but right now they're not part of the breeding part of the SSP. So we just are holding these animals. At some point when the master planning committee gets together, they may say, this one needs to be paired with a female over in Portland, Oregon or somewhere. At that time, we would send the animal over there. So sometimes we're just a holding institution. The lions, we actually used to have a pair of lions. They were a brother and a sister, but they weren't part of the SSP. They were from a zoo that did not participate, and their lineage was not known. So we got rid of that pair, brought in these two boys from Riverbank Zoo. They're half brothers. They come from the same dad, different moms, born a week apart. But this gets our foot in the door with the Lion SSP. We're in the process now of raising money for a new lion holding den so that eventually we can send off one of the males, get 1 to 2 females, and create our own pride here in Greenville. But there is some breeding going on at the zoo with the animals. Animals you don't think about. We think about the big animals, the lions, leopards, things like that. We have SSPs for the birds. This is our wreath hornbills. This year they're just getting into breeding season. We'll start increasing their protein, add a nest box probably by the end of the month, and we're hoping to breed these animals as part of that captive breeding population. The squirrel that's got his back to you up there is actually a very neat little fella, and he is the most valuable Prevost squirrel for breeding in the country right now. We just received a new female last year that he's supposed to breed with. We're hoping that he's bred with her. We should have a litter. We'll probably get 1 or 2 litters from that pair, and most likely they'll send her to another facility, bring in another female because his genes are so valuable. The ocelots, we've tried a long time to get our ocelot breeding pair going. Long story behind that, but went through exhibit renovations, a couple of different ocelots, till we finally got a pair that was recommended to breed. Waited for the female to get old enough. We're hoping that this year she's old enough. If not this year, she should be old enough next year. But they are recommended to breed. The spider monkeys. We've had spider monkeys out at the zoo for years, and for most of the time it's been an older female named Selma and her granddaughter Jasmine. 3 years ago, they said they wanted to have Jasmine bred and sent us a male. They said, but we don't want you to breed them right away. So what we needed to do, we put a birth control implant in Jasmine. They wanted us to breed 2 years after we got the male. So they've been together about two and a half years. This past summer, we were able to pull the birth control implant and hoping that they breed this year. Of course, the goal of any breeding program is to have babies. We've had some very successful births. The red pandas up on the top right, top left that you see up there, they were born in 2006, very unusual to have triplets. We were fortunate to have triplets, all 3 successfully raised. This year we've got a new female that we just received last year, and we're recommended breed. We should know by June, maybe July, but hopefully we'll have red pandas again at the Greenville Zoo. The orangutans, we brought them in 2003. Maya and Chelsea, first time the zoo's had orangutans. 2006, Chelsea gave birth to Bob, who, if anybody grew up in Greenville knows baby Bob, who actually has picked the Super Bowl winner the last 4 years in a row. So, but they're all part of the breeding program. Colobus monkeys, very successful breeding program. We brought in the female, Lammy, I believe it was 2008. She got pregnant the first year. We had our first baby. Next year, almost within a week of the first baby being born, had our second baby. The next year, within a week or so, had third baby. Always in January, always during an ice storm. I don't know how that happens. But, and then the SSP says, okay, that's enough of these genes. Y'all need to shut them down. We've got enough of their genetic material. So again, Lammy's been on a birth control implant. The Colobus monkey SSP just recently met, and what it looks like is they're going to want to send Valentino, the male, along with the 2 male offspring, to another zoo and send us a new male who will be intended to breed with Lammy and ultimately with Adana, the younger female, in a couple years. So it's not only who's pairing with who right now, but really looking down the road with the goal being a viable genetic population for the future.
So So as you guys can see, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with any zoologic collection. The SSPs are usually large groups, and they meet once or twice a year, and then they come out with recommendations. So it is a pretty complicated process, and as an AZA accredited zoos, we comply with their regulations pretty much unless there's any issue that we see. So Jeff discussed the AZA as it relates to species survival plans, but the AZA also functions to hold zoos to a higher standard and to make sure that we're doing our part for the planet. The AZA's conservation statement, I put it up there in its entirety because it's a pretty comprehensive statement. It says zoos and aquariums serve as conservation centers that are concerned about ecosystem health, take responsibilities for species survival, contribute to research, conservation, and education, and provide society the opportunity to develop personal connections with the animals in their care. We play a vital role in maintaining our planet's diverse wildlife and natural habitats while engaging the public to appreciate and participate in conservation. So there are two main types of conservation as it relates to living things. In situ conservation refers to the conservation efforts that are focused in the natural habitat of the animal or plant or whatever that you are looking at conserving. And then ex situ conservation is of course any conservation that occurs at a different site. Often zoos are included in the category of ex situ conservation, but a lot of zoos are broadening their efforts to also initiate participation in situ programs. So most conservation programs focus on one of the four following items. It may be possible to even combine two or more of these focuses. And there are four main features that conservationists use to rank and determine where to concentrate their efforts when determining field conservation projects. And the first one is to look at areas that are hotspots of biodiversity. Since it's not possible to conserve all biodiversity due to lack of resources and the need to use land for human activities, areas are prioritized to those which are most in need of conservation. Hotspot is a term used to define regions of high conservation priority, combining high richness, high biodiversity, and high level of threat. So the second one is you could concentrate your efforts on a threatened species. Over the last 200 years, many species have become extinct, and the extinction rate is on the rise due to the influence of human activity. Species that are facing a high risk of global extinction are cataloged and highlighted on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. You could also concentrate your effort on a threatened habitat. Habitat destruction comes in many forms, usually from clear cutting of rainforests to habitat destruction to changing in farming practices that affect the land. If a habitat is degraded or disappears, a species can also become threatened. And lastly, you could concentrate your efforts on flagship or keystone species, Conservation efforts are often focused on a single species, and this is usually for one of two reasons. Some species are actually key to the functioning of a habitat, and their loss would lead to greater than average change in other species populations. Second, people often find the idea of conserving one species more appealing than conserving others. For example, it's a lot easier to persuade people to conserve tigers than it is to conserve the band-winged grasshopper. So usually a flagship species, such as a tiger, can attract more resources for conservation, which can be used to conserve the habitat, and thereby you can conserve the band-winged grasshopper as well. There are many different facets to field conservation programs. The first one I wanted to mention is capacity building. Simply put, capacity building refers to activities that improve or enhance a nonprofit's ability to achieve its mission and sustain itself over time. So basically, it's investing in yourself or in your project, which is often your conservation effort and what you're passionate about. Second, involvement of the community. Any successful conservation program has to involve the community. Third is the actual education on the program. And again, this can be done in local areas. This can be done worldwide. It's amazing how YouTube has really opened our eyes to conservation education. And there's programs that are putting YouTube videos out there about everything. Public awareness is another one. If you are trying to conserve a species, especially if it's a local species, you've got to get the word out so that people are aware of what's going on. Another one is research. Often field conservation programs will have a very robust research component. This could involve collaring animals, sample collection, marking animals, data collection in many different forms, camera traps. They create an abundant amount of information, as a lot of you probably know. Rehabilitation, and I would add reintroduction as well. Some programs add this as a component and some programs don't have it. But definitely it's a way for the local population to get involved in a program too. And lastly, habitat protection is definitely a mainstay of any conservation program, because if you are rehabilitating animals, where are you going to release them? You've got to release them into some type of protected habitat. If you release them, you know, where they were hurt or where they were captured in the first place, then you're not really doing a whole lot of good. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about involving the community because that is so vital to the success of most of these programs. Once this is accomplished and the locals see the benefit to a conservation program, your chances of success are vastly improved. For example, the Red Panda Network actually hires local citizens called forest guardians, and that's what I have a picture of up on the slide. And these guys conduct population surveys on red pandas. They actually will monitor for illegal activity, such as collection of the animals for the pet trade. They're paid well by the Red Panda Network, and they also visit the local schools to talk about red pandas and their conservation. They talk about how they shouldn't be kept as pets, and the children then become interested in the cause and further strengthen the effort. And they actually had kids that were telling on their neighbors for keeping red pandas as pets once they had the buy-in of the children. So another example is the sustainability of programs. There are many field conservation programs that give back to the local community, and this can be done in many different ways. One example I wanted to give is by a project called Proyecto Titi. And it's an in situ field conservation project that serves to protect the golden lion tamarin in its natural rainforest environment in South America. A source of income for the local people was actually to help collect these animals for the pet trade. So in order to have a successful field conservation program, you have to give them another opportunity for income. And one thing that they did was they taught the people how to make bags out of plastic bags. And this is one of the bags that they make, and you guys are welcome to come check it out. But they actually take plastic grocery bags and they cut them up and they weave them together and they make these very solid bags, and they sell them, and they have found another option for earning a living in that area. So another area that I wanted to mention for involving the community is to actually understand the socioeconomic concerns in the community. One example of this is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they do the Okapi project. The people are forced to go into the forest, use slash and burn methods of farming in order to plant crops. And this is because once they plant the crops basically deplete the soil of all the nitrogen. And so, you know, they'll last for a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then the soil is so void of nutrients that they've got to go further into the rainforest in order to plant crops to feed their families. And of course, these people do have to feed their families, so you've got to find a balance. What the Okapi Conservation Project did was they actually taught these people agrofarming. So they taught them how to plant legumes, which is a plant that automatically puts nitrogen into the soil. And so the legume plants, they were fertilizing the soil while they were also yielding a crop. So the local people were able to see this in just a few years, that their crops were much better and that the soil was still usable even years later. And so that helped save the rainforest and the okapi habitat by making them not have to go into the rainforest to create more land for farming. And lastly, you definitely have to acknowledge customs and traditions with any of these programs. At the conference I was at this summer, they talked about how important that was, and basically that's the only way that you can get some of the local people to listen to you, is if you make sure that you listen to them. And education, education, education. So how can the Greenville Zoo get involved in field conservation efforts on any meaningful level? Well, in 2010, we established the Conservation and Research Committee. And the goal was to improve the conservation efforts of the Greenville Zoo, both locally and globally. The Conservation and Research Committee oversees our Quarters for Conservation program, which I'll talk a little more about in a few minutes. And they also review the grant applications for our conservation fund. So this committee has been in effect for about 4 years, and I definitely think that we've had an impact on the efforts of the zoo. So this is one of the purposes of the committee, and that's oversight of the Quarters for Conservation program. How this works is we basically add 25 cents onto each admissions fee for everyone that comes into the zoo, and the 25 cents is then put into a restricted conservation fund. And that money is only used for conservation and for our grants program. And this really gives us a great bank to be able to support these projects with. We also chose a way to involve the guests in the process. We have a kiosk that is in just after the ticket booth. If any of you guys have been to the zoo recently, there's a big globe sitting in the walkway after the ticket booth, and you put your token in the globe and you vote for the project that you like the most. There's 4 projects displayed on that kiosk every year, and we count the votes that the public gives, and basically the funding that each project receives at the end of the year is based on the percentage of votes that they received. This video shows what Sacramento Zoo is doing. If I can get my little mouse cursor to come up. And they also are participating in Quarters for Conservation, but it's just a little different perspective.
Today at the Sacramento Zoo, we're celebrating their 85th birthday this year, and I'm here with Sam Curtis and Twilight, who's our guest this morning, and I'm going to talk to Sam. He's an educational specialist out here. Sam, tell us a little bit about the zoo and some of the conservation programs that are going on.
Well, right now we've got our Quarters for Conservation program going on. It's something we just recently started. So basically, a quarter from every entrance fee is given directly to conservation. And we have got 3 different programs right now that we are putting that money towards. So we've got the Burrowing Owls, which is a program right here in Northern California, actually even in the Sacramento region. We've got Sumatra Orangutan Conservation Project, and we have got a Southern Ground Worm Project.
So every person, every guest that comes to the zoo, I want to add, a quarter of their admission goes to one of these conservation projects, and they give you these little quarters, and you can pick whichever one you want. The kids love it because you can just drop the coins in, and you can watch them roll down. The kids absolutely love it, and they're a part of this conservation program. Of course, you know, my heart is very near and dear to the orangutans. I was in Borneo this year, checking them out, and so you can drop a coin in whichever one you want, or you can donate even more to each conservation program. And what a great way. Sam, tell us a little bit, do some of these programs, where do they go, where do the funds?
So I just wanted to show you another program. There are 14 different zoos right now that participate in Quarters for Conservation, and they all do it a little differently. So you saw Sacramento Zoo, they've got kind of the wind tunnel cyclone, penny cyclone things that they use, and those are really popular. Ours is a big globe. You see it on the first picture here, and each side of the globe has little token acceptors that people put their coins in and they get counted. There's another example here, and this one is at the, now I'm going to forget. It's not Woodland Park. I'll remember later. But it's another example of Quarters for Conservation. They actually took soda machines and they repurposed the soda machines and painted them bright colors, and so they've got the acceptor. So a lot of different ways to do it, and a great easy way for zoos to get involved in conservation and have a dedicated restricted account to draw money from. So these are a few projects that we've supported over the years through our Quarters for Conservation program. Alta, who will be here in May, the Emery Leopard and Tiger Alliance. The picture of the two little guys at the top right, those are civets. And we supported the civet program, which is a program that the Small Carnivore Tag supports, and they were on our kiosk last year. A lot of people were like, I don't even know what a civet is, so now you know. And the Red Panda Network we've supported, International Elephant Foundation, and two of these I'd like to talk a little bit more about. So one of them is the Giant Armadillo Project. This is a small grassroots field conservation project. There are only 3 or 4 or 5 people that are participating in this project at any given time. The giant armadillo is the largest of the armadillo species and can reach up to 5 feet and weigh up to 100 pounds. So that's a big armadillo. Although giant armadillos range over most of South America, almost nothing is known about them, and they actually were thought to be extinct until recently, and that's because they're nocturnal and they've got very strange behaviors. They stay in their burrows most of the time, and they have very low population densities. The giant armadillo is threatened with extinction and is currently classified as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. So this project aims to establish the first long-term ecological study of giant armadillos in the Brazilian Pantanal wetland. The main goal is to investigate the ecology and biology of the species and understand its function in the ecosystem. They do this by using radio transmitters, camera traps, burrow surveys, resource monitoring, resource mapping, and interviewing the local people. They also do have a great education component to their program. I included a picture of Arnaud is the primary researcher, and he's talking to a class of students here in this picture. So this is another little video that I wanted to show. Maybe. If the mouse will come back up. And there are a bunch of these on YouTube, so they're kind of fun to watch.
Good morning. We are off to our second morning on the Giant Armadillo project. This morning we're going to go look for armadillo burrows, try to find some fresh burrows in which we can place a camera in front of it so that we can see if the animal goes in. And if the animal has entered, then we can put a trap and try to capture it. So the goal for the morning, the whole day, is to actually walk around searching for these burrows. I've just registered on our GPS this feeding hole that we just found a few minutes ago. This is very exciting because we've been walking for quite a couple of hours now, and we just found this fresh evidence of a giant armadillo. You can see that its tail, marks on its tail, some trash, the stem has been moved. So this might be 2 or 3 days old. So we know that we're in the right area. We're going to continue searching this area much more. We've been walking for now quite a while, and so this is nice. This is good news for us. We're very excited. It's getting dark, so we're heading back to the ranch. Unfortunately, although we saw some fresh tracks, we were unable to locate an armadillo burrow. Just set our camera and hopefully try to trap it. So we're going home and ready to start all over again tomorrow.
So I like that video. It's cute. Let me get to the next slide. So the Giant Armadillo Project was initiated in June of 2011, and since then, 8 individuals have been captured and marked. One fascinating fact about giant armadillos is that they are ecosystem engineers. So as you saw with the burrow that he pointed out in the video, they create these huge burrows, and over 24 different species have been documented using these burrows, and that includes ocelots, coatis, pigs, feral pigs, tapirs, and a bunch of other animals as well. And I showed the video because the video may be a little bit disappointing. It depicts an average day in the life of a field researcher. You may never see your target animal. It might take months. But with frustration can come great discovery. So they actually had the first account of a giant armadillo reproduction and birth in the wild. And the next video is pretty much when they saw a baby armadillo emerging from the burrow with a mom. And this made the front page of several magazines, and it was a great success for the project. Let's see if I can only play half of it. There's my mouse. So the camera trap, unfortunately, is going off like crazy, but you can see the little baby that just popped out of the burrow with its mother. And it confirmed some of what we already believed about armadillos. They only have one offspring. It also was able to confirm the gestation rate because they were able to document her going into the burrow and then emerging with the baby. So a lot of great work has been done with this project, and with a pretty small project and a small group of people. And I think they've left now. So another grassroots project that I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight is the Philippine Crocodile Project. This project involves a coalition of zoos, government organizations, and other interest groups. The Philippine crocodile is a critically endangered freshwater crocodile. It's endemic to the Philippines, so it only occurs there. And very few Philippine crocodiles remain in the wild. I believe it's around 200. The Mabuwaya Foundation aims to conserve the Philippine crocodile and its habitat. And this project has 5 critical components of a successful field research project. They have a great communication and public awareness campaign. They participate in a lot of research with telemetry with their babies that they release. They participate in habitat protection, and they have a great program to protect what they have identified as water sources for the nestling crocodiles. They also participate in capacity building, so they are recognizing how to further improve their efforts. And they have a population reinforcement and recovery project as well. So one of the great things that they do is a Head Start program, and a lot of reptile and amphibian groups will participate in some type of Head Start program, and you'll probably hear more about that later on this month when Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation is here. But they were able to show that when they found the eggs in the wild and they took them back into captivity and they reared them in controlled settings, that they had about a 50% survival rate. And that was much higher than we see in the wild when they are not in controlled settings. So that they deem as a successful program, and when data in the wild is probably between 10 and 20% or less. And they definitely have a great education component. You have to when you're trying to conserve a crocodile. Crocodiles are not typically a species that gets much love, and same thing with spiders and snakes. They often don't get a whole lot of attention, but they have been able to go to the schools. They've gotten the kids involved. They had, like the first picture that I showed was a little girl and a boy from the school, and they were checking out the nestling sites where the youngsters had been released. So they've got posters, they've got coloring books, and they have all sorts of ways to involve the kids in realizing how important these crocodiles are and that we need to protect them. And one thing I wanted to mention before I move on is they also participated in getting the buy-in of the local community, because in the habitats that they were trying to protect, they would put wells for the local people to use. So normally they had to walk probably a mile or so to get fresh water. And by putting fresh water wells in these habitats, it really made the people see the importance of them. And so they wanted to conserve these areas, both for the crocodiles and for the fact that there was fresh water there too. So I did want to mention a little bit more about what zoos and aquariums do for education. So if I asked everyone here to define conservation education, you would probably all give me a different answer, and not one of them would be wrong. But conservation education, it is a process. But we're working to connect audiences to nature. We're working to inspire people, to influence the audience. We're working to encourage people, and we would like to have a measurable impact. So that's what zoos and aquariums are looking at. How can zoos and aquariums get involved in field conservation education? There's several different levels. There's international programs, there are national, regional, local, and I would say programs at the zoo. And this picture shows one of our volunteers who's actually talking to a group of kids, and she's teaching them about, looks like our prehensile-tailed skink, Noelle. But we have a lot of different programs like that where we teach the kids about conservation. We have a Party for the Planet event, and that highlights Earth Day every year. We also have an Endangered Species Day. So those are just a few of the education programs that we do. What are some other ways that zoos and aquariums can help conservation efforts? Well, AZA says there's 4 levels of support, and one is kind of your baseline level. You can write a check, and that's great. Even the smallest of zoos can write a check. You can also send materials or equipment, and I have a picture here of, it's called an education suitcase that you can pretty much assemble in the States, and it can contain coloring books, worksheets, stickers, puppets, anything that will get the kids involved and excited about the conservation project. So it's pretty easy for zoos to do that as well, and there's a lot of different zoos participating on that level. Zoos could have staff travel to the field site for training workshops, and they can conduct training workshops. They could also develop culturally appropriate lesson plans, and you see the Proyecto TT here and their eco mochilas, which is what these bags are called. But staff can do that, and you can also participate with, you know, a combination of all of these, and that would be the ultimate goal, is to try to participate on all of these levels. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeff again so that he can talk a little bit about zoo and aquarium education as it related to Kiko with us.
Thank you. Security calling me. Kiko, if you weren't around a year ago, Kiko is a young giraffe we had born in October of 2012, and really took off was the conservation message. The project started actually as an education program. When we came in with the webcams, we originally were installing webcams as part of our education programs to bring the actual exhibit into the classroom. It was funded by our Greenville Zoo Education Foundation, and once we got the webcams installed, we were working with EarthCam as far as the technical work. EarthCam went ahead and went live with it immediately, October 2nd. Once we got our antennas up to test it, it went live and it took off. The webcam, initially, we had people Facebooking in. I've talked to the people at EarthCam, and if you've ever looked at the EarthCam website, you can see everything from Times Square to Singapore to just about anywhere in the world. Within the first week of the webcam in the giraffe barn, the fellow told me boss called him up, said, "What's going on down there?" They have a tube that they stream all their videos through. They had to enlarge it the first week just because of the giraffe cam. Over the course of Autumn's pregnancy and the birth of Kiko and Kiko raised in the barn, they had to expand that fiber tube 10 different times just to meet the demand. We'll start a quick video.
It takes the mouse a second to pop up. So we try not to totally gross you guys out. I started it right after the birth, right after he plopped out. So he's laying on the floor right now.
Kiko was actually born about 10 minutes to midnight on October 22nd, 2012. This is Autumn and Walter's first calf. They are an SSP species. We talked about how animals come to different zoos. Autumn and Walter are both on a breeding loan to the Greenville Zoo for the purpose that you see right here. It's Autumn's first calf. Want to see that? Get a chance to see. This was all presented live on the Earth Cam. We had over 1.5 million people around the world watching this when it went viral. We talk about it from an education standpoint, what this did on our Facebook page. We went from about 4,000 to 6,000 likes on our Facebook to 32,000 within the first 2 months. It brought people to Facebook. They started researching giraffes. If you followed Facebook during that time, you'd see people, they go out online, read a book, they wanted to share it with others. We probably shared more giraffe knowledge during that first month and a half than we could ever share in a classroom or anywhere else. It was a very uneasy evening for a lot of us that were there that night. To do this live had never been done before via webcam, and there was a lot of concern. Anytime you have a birth at the zoo, you never know what's going to happen. We were blessed this time. Everything worked out well. Within the first hour, Kiko was up on his feet. But also what it did, it brought us a lot of new visitors, people that we could share the conservation message with. Our attendance with Kiko went from an average of about 270,000 to over 338,000 visitors. And since that time, he's still followed by webcam. I've got a lady lives up in Washington that follows him religiously, watches him out on exhibit in the paddock, watches him in the barn, posts every morning. She sends us a check for $35 or $40 a month off of her disability. And this is what she lives for, is watching this giraffe on the webcam. The ability to reach people besides the classroom, interactive out in the zoo, but through social media, I think is going to continue to grow, give us these opportunities to reach people, talk to them about conservation. We're looking at a lot of other programs that we can take online to our Facebook followers so that we can keep that information flowing. That's about done.
So lastly, I wanted to talk about the Greenville Zoo Conservation Fund and a few of the research projects that we've participated in and supported. So we do have a conservation fund, which is a small grants program. The funding is made possible, like I said earlier, through our Quarters for Conservation program. And first-time applicants can apply for up to $1,000, and proven applicants can apply for up to $3,000. And these grants are open to individuals, government entities, universities, and nonprofits are all invited to apply. So one of the grants that we have supported in the past was submitted by Upstate Forever, and that was titled The Protection and Establishment of a Nature Park on Poinsett Highway. This particular site had proximity to Paris Mountain State Park, and by protecting this semi-urban green space and its riparian buffers, Upstate Forever was providing public recreational opportunities and expanding habitat for wildlife and plant life. And they were also protecting water quality in this area. So that's one thing that we were able to do through the Conservation Fund. Another one that is also a partnership for habitat conservation is that of the Bog Turtle program. The bog turtle is the smallest turtle in North America, It's usually only about 3 or 4 inches long, and it weighs only a couple of ounces. It is classified as threatened, and its orange and yellow patches on either side of the neck easily distinguish it from other turtles. Bog turtles live in the wetlands, and the wetlands are usually fed by springs, creating the wet, muddy soil that they need. There are 2 distinct populations of bog turtles, and they're separated by about 200 miles. So one is the northern population, which is greatly threatened right now, and then the second is the southern population, which is what we have here and in North Carolina. The southern population is also threatened, and we're trying to get on top of this situation before it becomes as critical as the population status up in the north. There is a local program called Project Bog Turtle, and they function to support, educate, cooperate with, and involve landowners in bog turtle conservation. Oh, I'm getting the wrap it up signal. So I'll go really quickly through this. About 75% of the land that bog turtles are on and live on is owned by private landowners. So what Project Bog Turtle has done is they basically have a program where they will pay landowners for keeping their areas natural, and allowing the bog turtles to stay there and keeping it as a wetland environment. They also have a research component, and they monitor the bog turtle habitats. I'm gonna go through these really quick. I won't touch on that one. I do want to just mention Frog Watch. So I saw Barbara back here. Barbara Foster is our reptile curator at the Greenville Zoo, and she is also the regional coordinator for Frog Watch. Now, Frog Watch is AZA's flagship citizen science program. So citizen science is basically any science that is done with non-scientific, non-professionals, lay people, students, whatever you want to call it. It is science that is done by everybody. And what we do with Frog Watch is we actually train people, we train kids, we train zoo guests on how to identify these frogs by their calls. And once they hear the calls, they're actually tally sheets, so the people will tally down which species of frog call they heard. And we do this at Lake Conisty Nature Park in addition to a handful of other sites. I wanted to mention the partnership with Lake Conisty, and we also have a partnership with A.J. Wittenberg, which is a school in downtown Greenville. The kids at this school have participated for the last 2 years, and we anticipate they will continue their participation in the program. And I think Barbara can attest to the fact that the kids actually catch on to learning the frog calls a lot earlier than the adults do, so they really are a vital part of the program. I'm just going to zoom through some of this. So one of the research projects that the zoo has been involved in is the Great Ape Heart Project, and this is based in Zoo Atlanta. And basically their goal is to get a comprehensive database of cardiac parameters, and these are via ultrasounds or blood pressure values for all of the great apes, and that includes gorillas, bonobos, chimps, and orangutans. They also want to identify risk factors and determine effective treatments. And this is the last video I have, so we'll see if it crashes actually it's the second to the last. It might have to be the last. So this is a training session that we're doing at the Greenville Zoo, and that is our male orangutan, Maya. And we have the ultrasound, and his keeper is helping position him, and she is giving him Gatorade through the little bottle, which he likes a lot. So he'll sit there and he'll drink his Gatorade while we try to position the ultrasound probe and get a good image of his heart. So he's a very cooperative guy. And all of our orangutans, they do a great job at this. They're so smart. So we have been able to participate in the project by submitting values for Maya. And like I said, their specific goals are for all institutes that hold great apes to do this, to standardize the ultrasounds and determine effective treatments. And the last project that I'll mention is the Elephant IMLS project. So both the Grade 8 Park project and the Elephant project were supported by large IMLS grants, and that's the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. This was the first comprehensive scientific assessment of the welfare status of elephants in zoos ever. It was started in 2010 and it ended just at the end of 2013, so it has just ended. Data was collected for almost 300 elephants at 78 institutions. All of this was voluntary, although it was definitely encouraged by groups that were AZA accredited. And the goal of the IMLS study is to come out with, it's basically going to be a manual of recommendations for how to keep elephants and different things that elephants require. So they have surveyed all of these zoos, we've submitted samples, and it's really a huge project and a huge undertaking, and it's definitely going to improve the welfare of elephants in zoos. And I said that was the last video, but this is the last video. One of our zookeepers here has actually done a study with her ocelots to see what they do when we're not at the zoo. And this is the particular pair that we were hoping for breeding behavior. So unfortunately, we haven't seen breeding behavior yet on the videos, but this was just a cute one I wanted to add to the presentation of our female ocelot having fun after the zoo closed and all of the guests have left. If I can get the mouse to come up. So it's just quick. She likes to jump and hang upside down. So she was able to catch some great footage with she basically used a camera trap on these guys, and she set up video cameras on them. And she's going to be presenting her research at the AZA conference. And that's all I have for tonight, so I'll leave it on this screen because it has the upcoming lectures identified, and we will be hanging around for a little bit if anyone has any questions or if anyone wants to visit the zoo animals. Thanks for having us. Have a good night.